On June 4, 1960, four Finnish teenagers decided to go on a camping trip near Lake Bodom in southern Finland. At first, their trip went exactly as planned. Beautiful, calm weather, peaceful surroundings, and the heart of nature. Everything seemed perfect, at least at the beginning. But from that trip, only one of them would return. The others were brutally murdered. What exactly happened on that trip? What kind of horror turned it into one of the most famous unsolved crimes in the world? And why did this case become such a deep mystery that has puzzled investigators for decades? This was a murder, a multiple homicide, that occurred while the teens were camping near Lake Bodom. While the crime initially seemed straightforward, the investigation quickly branched out into various directions and spawned many theories, some of which were completely unexpected. That morning, two motorcycles were making their way down a narrow rural road in southern Finland, surrounded by breathtaking natural scenery. Dense forests, hills, and green plains. Riding the motorcycles were four teenagers who had brought along everything they needed for their camping trip: a tent, supplies, and gear. They were excited to spend a weekend in the serenity of nature. The first motorcycle was driven by Seppo Boiman, 18 years old, with his girlfriend Anya Tulikki-Maki, 15, riding behind him. The second was driven by Nils Gustafsson, also 18, with his girlfriend, Mila Ermeli Björklund, who was 15 at the time and about to turn 16. The four were close friends, and they decided to celebrate Mila's upcoming birthday with a special camping trip. As they rode up a winding mountain path, Lake Bodom gradually came into view. It was a large lake, approximately 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide, surrounded by thick forests, especially pine and birch trees, known for their height and longevity. The density of the trees made the lake virtually invisible from ground level unless viewed from a higher elevation. The lake was located on the outskirts of the city of Espoo, but it was secluded, remote, and not frequently visited. When they arrived, they parked their motorcycles in a small lot for visitors, beside a modest wooden kiosk run by an elderly woman. They got off their bikes and bought some soft drinks, alcoholic beverages, and snacks. They couldn't help but notice that the woman running the kiosk seemed a little odd. Her clothes were disheveled, and her hair was messy. When they told her they planned to camp near the lake, she suddenly seemed agitated, stared at them with concern, and said, "The walk to the lake from the forest is long, and the terrain is rough. You should camp somewhere closer." But they insisted, saying they had come all this way for that specific reason. She responded nervously, "Do as you wish. Just stay far from here." They found her reaction strange, but brushed it off and continued toward the lake. As they rode, Mila glanced back and noticed the woman still watching them, her gaze filled with unease. A feeling of anxiety crept over Mila. Was the place truly safe? Why did that woman look so concerned? They found a path through the forest that led directly to the lake. The further they went, the more isolated it became. When they arrived, they realized the area was completely deserted. No tents, no campers. Earlier, they had seen a few families and fishermen along the road, but by sunset, everyone had packed up and left. They were now completely alone. Mila's unease deepened. There were no signs of other people nearby. The area felt abandoned and eerie. Despite her instincts, she said nothing, wanting to keep the mood positive. After all, the others were there to celebrate her birthday. A few fishermen spotted the group as they headed toward the southern part of the lake, an area known for being especially secluded and overgrown, which made it unpopular among regular visitors. The terrain was rough, and visibility was poor due to the dense trees. Eventually, the group found a small hill overlooking the lake and decided it was the perfect spot to camp. It offered quiet and privacy. They pitched a single tent big enough for all four of them, lit a small fire, and began to relax and enjoy their time in nature. They parked their motorcycles near some nearby trees and gathered around the fire, chatting and laughing. 3 of them seemed to be enjoying the evening, but Mila remained quiet, lost in thought, still haunted by the old woman's strange warning. Something about it felt deeply unsettling, but she didn't want to spoil the trip, especially since it was meant to be for her. That night, they sat around the fire talking. Anya spoke about how controlling her father was and how he had tried to stop her from coming on this trip, still treating her like a child. The others listened intently as they sipped their drinks. The summer night was unusually warm, and they sat a little away from the fire to avoid overheating. As time passed, the sun slowly began to dip below the horizon. But what makes that part of Finland unique during summer is a natural phenomenon called the white nights of midsummer, where the sun never fully sets in some regions near the Arctic Circle. So even after midnight, a faint glow still lingered on the horizon. At that time, the atmosphere was similar to the early moments of dawn as we know it, faint darkness touched by a thin thread of sunlight. It was the kind of ambience that still counts as night, but with a soft glow that gave it a magical calmness, while also stirring an eerie sense of fear and strangeness. This phenomenon is known as the midnight sun, and it's common in some parts of the world, but that's not our focus now. At around 2 a.m., the 2 young men were drinking alcohol and had clearly started to show signs of intoxication. Anya had already gone to sleep inside the tent, while Mila felt the time was right to write in her diary. She always carried it with her and wrote in it whenever she had a moment of quiet. She documented the events of the day, just as I've told you up to this point, and added that the boys were quite drunk, that Seppo had started fishing, and that Anya had gone to bed. Mila then wrote that she was going to put her diary away and get ready to sleep. Those were the last words she ever wrote. 9 hours later, we arrive at the following morning, which was still technically the same day, as her last diary entry was at 2 a.m., and it was now around 10 or 11 in the morning. That day, a man named Asko Johansson, who lived in a nearby town, had gone on a hike with his 2 young sons. They were planning to go swimming in the lake. The sun was shining, and the lake looked beautiful, which encouraged them to continue their walk. As they walked along the lakeshore looking for a good swimming spot, they noticed something strange in the distance. At first, they thought it was a pile of trash, and were surprised that campers would leave their garbage in such a pristine place. The boys started to approach the trash, but Asko felt uneasy and told them to stay back while he checked it out himself. As he got closer, he realized that what he thought was garbage wasn't that at all. It was a collapsed and torn tent, stained with dark blotches. When he got even closer, the horrifying truth revealed itself. A body lay sprawled over the tent, a young man, his face disfigured from severe blows, clearly dead. Parts of another body, this one belonging to a girl, could be seen underneath the tent. Both were covered in blood. Horrified, Asko rushed back to his sons, grabbed their hands, and ran to the nearest place with a phone. From there, he called the Finnish emergency number, 112, and reported what he had seen. Within minutes, police arrived at the crime scene. The body on top of the tent was identified as Nils Gustafsson. He had suffered brutal trauma from a hard object. His skull was fractured, his jaw broken, and one of his eyes was damaged. He was barefoot, lying on the torn, blood-soaked tent, as though some beast had attacked it. The second visible body, under the tent, was Mila, Nils's girlfriend. Her condition was even worse. She had been stabbed deeply all over her body, and her bones were broken. Her undergarments were disheveled, indicating a possible sexual assault before or after her death. Inside the collapsed tent, the bodies of Seppo and Anya were also found. They had been murdered in their sleep with stabs and heavy blows. Their injuries were not as extreme as Mila's, but both had crushed skulls and broken jaws. As the police began collecting evidence and removing the bodies, an even more shocking revelation occurred. Faint moaning sounds were heard. It was Nils. Despite his horrific injuries, he was still alive. His jaw was broken, and he couldn't speak. He could only groan and vomit blood. An ambulance was immediately called, and he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Because the lake was a popular spot during the day, a crowd quickly gathered at the scene, which led to the contamination and loss of many vital pieces of evidence, such as footprints and possible DNA traces, greatly hindering the police investigation. The murder weapon was never clearly identified, but it was obvious that it had to be a large, sharp knife, as it had pierced the tent and stabbed the victims as they slept. It's likely that the victims tried to escape, but the attacker managed to overpower them all. Strangely, the killer didn't steal everything but did ransack the tent and scattered some items into the forest. Several things were missing, including motorcycle keys, wallets, watches, Seppo's leather jacket, and Nils's shoes. He was found barefoot. It seemed the attacker might have had theft in mind, or at least took the opportunity after committing the murders. Mila's diary was found at the scene, still in place, but it contained no useful information about what happened. Her last entry was at 2 a.m., stating she was going to sleep and noting that the boys were drunk, a potentially important detail, though not unusual for teenagers on a camping trip. What made her diary especially important was that it helped determine the time they went to sleep, meaning the attack must have occurred after 2 a.m., likely between 2:30 and dawn. Police began a search operation in the surrounding forest. About a kilometer from the tent, they found Nils's shoes, partially buried and heavily blood-stained. The entire situation was baffling, and no motive or suspect had yet been identified. The only hope lay in Nils waking up from his coma and being able to tell them what had happened. Soon after, 2 new witnesses came forward, birdwatchers who were roaming the forest at dawn or dusk with binoculars, tracking birds. On the morning of the crime, 2 birdwatchers were wandering near the lake. Both reported seeing an unusual individual, someone who could potentially be the first suspect in this case. They said they were watching birds through binoculars when they noticed a tall, blond man with a square, sharp jawline. He was acting strangely and appeared visibly anxious. Their testimonies matched that of a 14-year-old boy who had gone fishing at the lake around 6 a.m., the same time mentioned by the birdwatchers. This boy also reported seeing a man matching the same description near the campsite. Neither the birdwatchers nor the boy were close enough to the tent to notice if there were any bodies, so they didn't suspect anything at first. However, after learning about the murders, they came forward with their testimonies, believing the man could be a suspect. Meanwhile, the police had placed all their hope in Nils, the sole survivor, hoping he would regain consciousness and reveal what happened. Eventually, Nils began to wake from his coma, and everyone believed the mystery was about to be solved. But there was one problem. Nils had completely lost his memory due to the severe head trauma and couldn't recall anything about the night of the attack. As he began to partially recover, Nils started to remember a few vague details. He said he had woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps crunching dry leaves, slowly approaching their tent. All 4 friends had been sleeping in the same tent. Through a small opening, he could see the outside. It looked like the first light of dawn, as was common during summer in that region. The footsteps grew closer, and then he heard the sound of the tent's ropes being cut, as if someone were trying to collapse it. After that, he saw the shadow of a person behind the tent, who began stabbing into the tent using a knife, without entering. Nils was paralyzed with fear and unable to act. The last thing he remembered was that shadow. He couldn't see any facial features or recall any distinctive traits. After being discharged from the hospital and showing some recovery, police visited Nils at home again, hoping he'd remember more. But he couldn't recall anything useful. The police then decided to use an old technique to recover suppressed memories, hypnosis. Nils agreed to undergo it, and began to reveal details he hadn't mentioned before. He said they had tried to resist the attacker, and since he had been closest to the tent's entrance, he managed to crawl out. but the attacker kicked him forcefully in the jaw, breaking it, then struck him on the head, causing him to black out. Under hypnosis, he also described the attacker as a man in his late 20s to 30s, tall, blonde, with a sharp face and square jawline. This perfectly matched the descriptions given by the boy and the birdwatchers. The police created a rough sketch of the suspect and distributed it widely in hopes someone would recognize him. A week after the crime, a funeral was held for the 3 victims, attracting significant media attention. In one of the photos taken at the funeral, police noticed a calm-looking man standing in the background. He was tall, blonde, with a square jaw, and none of the victims' families recognized him. At the same time, police received a crucial tip from staff at a hospital in Helsinki, 25 kilometers from the lake. They reported that on June 6, the day after the murders, a strange man entered the hospital. His clothes were stained with red spots, and he was seeking medical help. But upon examination, he had no injuries. When asked about the stains, he claimed they were paint and that he had thought he was hurt. After the news of the murders spread, the doctors became suspicious and reported the man to the police, especially since his name had been recorded in the hospital's database. The police were shocked to find that the man wasn't a stranger to them. He was a 36-year-old German man named Hans Assmann, with a mysterious past. According to his story, he had once been a Nazi soldier who fell in love with a Jewish woman and fled with her to Finland. Hans was tall, blonde, with a defined face and square jaw, fitting the description exactly. But the police couldn't tie him to the murders. He claimed he had spent the night of the murders with his girlfriend and her family in Helsinki, and they confirmed his alibi. Therefore, the police didn't even request a forensic test on his clothes, even though they were covered in red stains, something that remains highly suspicious. Later, a new suspect emerged and shifted police focus away from Hans. This man was named Carl Gustafsson, a 50-year-old local who lived near the lake and owned the kiosk where the strange woman had sold the 4 friends their drinks before the trip. That woman was his wife, and she worked at the kiosk with their young daughter. Carl had a reputation for a bad temper and heavy drinking. He would often chase campers away from the area, claiming the land was his property. He was known to threaten campers and had even fired warning shots in the past. When the 4 friends mentioned their plan to camp there, his wife had warned them and seemed worried for their safety. Despite Carl's disturbing behavior, his appearance didn't match the suspect's description. He wasn't blonde, nor tall, and didn't have a square jaw. However, he was aggressive and had potential motives. Still, his wife and daughter provided an alibi, saying he was at home all night. Their house was only 800 meters from the crime scene. Based on these testimonies, police ruled him out as a suspect. Days, months, and even years passed with no new leads. By October 1969, 9 years had gone by since the Lake Bodom murders. No one knew anything, and no evidence surfaced at the time. You remember Carl, right? Carl was extremely drunk, as usual, and appeared to have been in a fight with his wife and daughter. His daughter, who had been 12 years old at the time of the crime, was now 21. She had grown tired of her father and his constant problems, and began clashing with him too, until their disputes escalated to the point where she threatened to report him to the police. Carl then rushed out of the house and went to a neighbor's place in an attempt to calm down and avoid another argument. He began drinking with this neighbor, and as they drank, Carl started complaining about his problems. Gradually, the conversation took a darker turn, until Carl revealed a significant and shocking secret. He told his neighbor that he could no longer keep it in, that the secret had haunted him for years and given him nightmares. He confessed, quite simply, that he was the one who killed the 3 teenagers and injured the 4th near the lake 9 years earlier. He told him that he didn't know what to do anymore and was scared to go to the police. The neighbor advised him to think carefully, warning that a confession could lead to prison. Carl seemed deeply distressed, held his head and cried. then quickly drank 2 bottles of wine and left, heading toward the lake. Midnight passed, and Carl never returned home. His wife, son, and daughter became worried. They asked the neighbor, who told them he had last seen Carl heading toward the lake in a state of breakdown. The family rushed to the lake to look for him but couldn't find him, so they contacted the police. The police arrived and began searching. After several hours, they found Carl's body floating on the surface of the lake, just 4 meters away from the site of the original crime. 2 empty bottles of white wine were found next to him. The police couldn't determine exactly what had happened or how he had died. Did he take his own life out of guilt? Was it an accident due to intoxication? Or had someone killed him? The only confession was the one made to his neighbor. Carl's wife initially defended him, insisting he had been asleep beside her on the night of the crime. But later, she changed her statement and said he had been sleeping on the couch in the living room, and that she had lied to protect him because she was afraid of him. Carl's death remained mysterious, and the police couldn't confirm whether he had really committed the crime. There was no physical evidence, and his confession was made while drunk, just like his neighbor was. Furthermore, his appearance didn't match the suspect described by police at the time. After Carl's death, the focus returned to Hans, the first suspect, the German man who had fled from Nazism. He always denied any involvement in the crime, despite his shady past. In 1973, on his deathbed, he confessed to a journalist that he was responsible for a series of unsolved crimes near the lake, including a double murder in 1959, but at a different, nearby lake. When asked directly about the Bodom Lake murders, he denied any involvement. Hans died, taking the mystery with him, leaving behind more questions than answers. It remained unclear whether he was truly the killer or not. Decades passed, and the case remained unsolved. Then, in the early 2000s, with advancements in DNA science, evidence from the crime was reanalyzed. That's when the shocking revelation came. A new suspect emerged. Nils Gustafsson, the sole survivor, who had lived a normal life for 44 years. In 2004, the police arrested him on charges of murdering his 3 friends. They had re-examined his shoe, which had been found buried a kilometer from the tent. It was stained with the victim's blood, but had no traces of Nils' own blood, suggesting that the killer had worn it during the attack. The trial began in May 2005. The prosecution claimed that Nils, after drinking heavily, had gotten into a violent argument with his girlfriend. The others tried to calm him down, but he clashed with one of them, Seppo, who broke his jaw. Later that night, Nils supposedly returned to the tent with a knife and a rock and attacked his sleeping friends, killing them. He then staged his own injuries to appear as another victim. The defense argued that Nils' physical condition would not have allowed him to commit such a brutal crime. They presented photos showing his terrible state while in the hospital. Due to lack of solid evidence, Nils was acquitted. Still, many continued to view him as the prime suspect, despite the Finnish government later awarding him €45,000 in compensation as an apology. To this day, there is no confirmed killer. Not Carl, despite his confession. Not Hans, despite his eerie past. And not Nils, despite all the signs pointing toward him. Perhaps the killer was someone else entirely, someone unknown. There was one final suspect who emerged before Carl's death, a man named Pentti Soininen. He told fellow inmates in prison that he committed the murder when he was 15 years old. But no one believed him. It was hard to imagine a teenager overpowering and killing 3 strong youths. To this day, the murder weapon has never been found, and the details of that tragic night remain a mystery. One of the strangest parts of the case is the unidentified tall man who appeared at the victim's funeral, matching the suspect description, but never identified. As for me, I'm not sure why, but I strongly suspect Nils. Maybe because he was the only survivor, or maybe because he had enough motive. But these are just suspicions. And you, what do you think? Who do you believe is the real killer? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to support the content if you liked it. I'll see you in upcoming videos and new cases, God willing.